How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. I hope everyone had a wonderful Memorial Day holiday weekend. Firstly, wanted to give a big thank you to anyone who has served for this country and allows us to do the things and have the freedom we have today. But on to today's video topic, we have a little bit of an update on Rashan Gary. We kind of got an update on his injury status this weekend. We know Rashan Gary tore his ACL back in Week 9 last season against the Detroit Lions, and we've been kind of wondering when he's going to return, what his timetable is going to be, and what that edge room is going to look like to start the season. So we did get a little bit of an update over the weekend. Deepak Shona, a sports medical analysis Twitter, said Packers Rashan Gary, solid chance to play week 1, but not a lock. Likely would be less than 100% until the end of the season. So this is kind of the first update we've really gotten on Rashan Gary in terms of what that timetable is. The Packers are very hidden with that sort of stuff. They'll just say, okay, maybe he's on schedule or he's looking good. That's really all they ever say, and then we kind of have to wait until the start of the season and really get an idea of when that player may come back. But this tweet does give us a little bit of insight at how far he actually is in his recovery. We saw during last week, during the one session that was open to the media during the Packers OTAs, that Rashan Gary was on the field, but he was rehabbing. Obviously, he wasn't fully practicing. It's been just over 6 months since he tore his ACL, but to still see him out there during OTAs, rehabbing on the sideline, I think it's still great to see. Like I said, considering it is 6 months, 24 days to this very day, so almost 7 months since his torn ACL, and he's already out there OTAs, at least rehabbing. I think that's a very good sign, and that does kind of line up with what this tweet says, that he does have a chance to play week 1, but it's not a lock. If Rashan Gary were to return and play in some capacity week 1 versus the Chicago Bears, that would be 10 months and 4 days post ACL tear, which I think would be pretty early, but not too far out of the realm of possibility. We saw last year Elgton Jenkins returned in 9 months and 28 days and then played every snap in that week 2 game. So, you know, it definitely can happen. There's stories of players coming back super early, and then of course there's stories of players coming back super late and that knee injury lingering, like David Bakhtiari. But it seems like Rashan Gary is very ahead of schedule, and the possibility for him returning sooner rather than later is higher. And if Rashan Gary were to return week 1, I honestly think it would be on a snap count. I don't think he'd go right into week 1 playing every single snap like we're used to seeing. Obviously, Rashan Gary is our best edge rusher and one of our best defenders, so we want him on the field. That's when our defense is going to be the best. But we know how careful the Packers are with their injuries. They don't like to rush players back. They like to give them as much time as possible. But even saying that, Elgton Jenkins did return in under 10 months after his torn ACL. So it surely is possible. Rashan Gary very well could see some snaps week 1. A lot of people were saying, okay, we're going to more so see Rashan Gary possibly after week 6. The Packers have their bye on week 6. So a lot of people were kind of thinking, okay, after their bye week, maybe we start to see Rashan Gary. But now with this news coming out, seeing him rehabbing during OTAs, I think it is a possibility we do see him before week 6, even week 1. Like I said, I think it's going to be on a snap count. So it's going to be very important for the rest of this edge room to start hot and getting pressure on the quarterback, because last year, after Rashan Gary went down, the Packers pass rush room didn't really do too hot. They then finished the season ranked 22nd in total pressures. And in general, late last year, the lack of Rashan Gary, the lack of a pass rush, really hurt the Packers defense. So if they go into the season, even if Rashan Gary does return week 1, it's going to be on a pitch count, most likely. So that room's really going to have to be able to produce without Rashan Gary. And I think they did a wonderful job this offseason adding talent to that room. So now I want to go over the edge room as a whole for this football team and kind of give an outlook on what that position may look like going into the season. So first, I want to go over every single edge player the Packers have on their roster right now. Since it is still OTAs, the Packers have a ton of edge players. This is likely going to be brought down to like 5 or 6 players, but it's Rashan Gary at the top here. We have Preston Smith, Kingsley Enagbare, Lucas Van Ness, their first round draft selection, Justin Hollins, Brenton Cox Jr., the one undrafted free agent that a lot of people think could make this roster, myself included, John Garvin, Keyshawn Banks, Ladarius Hamilton, and Kenneth Odumegu, the player pathway program from Nigeria we signed this offseason. Preston Smith will likely start the season as that #1 edge rusher if Rashan Gary doesn't return week 1. And Preston Smith had a pretty solid year last year with 42 pressures and 10 total sacks and a 63.4 pass rush grade. Preston Smith is a very solid all-around edge rusher, and I think he does hold his own there, but I do believe he needs another guy on the opposite side of him for the Packers to really excel at rushing the passer, and we saw why that was the issue last year when Rashan Gary went down. Then they have Kingsley Enagbare, who I think will start at edge if Rashan Gary doesn't return week 1. So I think there's 2 starting edges. Week 1 will be Preston Smith and Kingsley Enagbare. He had a pretty solid year last year with 25 total pressures and 3 sacks. I'm very confident in Kingsley Enagbare. I think he takes a big sophomore step this year. I thought that was a draft steal from day 1 in the 5th round. A lot of people had him ranked as a 2nd or 3rd round edge player, and for the Packers to get him in the 5th round, I was super hyped for that, and he did show, his potential last year, and I think he will get plenty of opportunities, plenty of snaps to start the season, and he will be starting at edge to start the season. Then the Packers used their first overall selection at pick 13 on Lucas Van Ness out of Iowa, and I think he will get snaps, early on. I think they'll kind of do a rotation there. Obviously, edge players on the Green Bay Packers normally get around 65% of snaps if they are starting, so that leaves 35% of snaps for rotational edge guys, and I think that will 100% include Lucas Van Ness week 1, and he will see at least 30% of snaps week 1 as a rotational edge player. And Lucas Van Ness has inside-outside versatility. They can bring him in, on early downs to help against the run. And they can also have him there on, passing downs, on 3rd down as a premier pass rusher. The dude has a lot of potential, speed, strength. I'm super excited for Lucas Van Ness. And them drafting a edge player in the 1st round, I think, helps this room a lot. And then when Rashan Gary's back to full health at 100%, I think they're going to have a great rotation of edge guys between Rashan Gary, Lucas Van Ness, Kingsley Enagbare, and Preston Smith. I think that's a very, very solid group of 4 edge rushers there. As for the 3 other edge players that have snaps for the Green Bay Packers this last season, Justin Hollins, John Garvin, and Ladarius Hamilton. The best out of the 3, I would say, is Justin Hollins. They just re-signed him this offseason, and I thought he played pretty well as a rotational edge guy last year when he needed to with the injury to Rashan Gary. I thought he defended the run pretty well. He also had 9 total pressures and 3 sacks. John Garvin is a player that I just don't see making this roster. It's the 2nd year in a row, I believe, that he just didn't attend OTAs. I don't know the reason for that, but I feel like if you're a fringe roster player, you'd want to go to these practices. You'd want to go to every practice possible to try to make the roster. But this is the 2nd year in a row where he just doesn't show up to OTAs. Like I said, I don't know the reason. It could be something that's not football related and he just can't make it, and that's understandable, but I don't know the reason. But to see John Garvin not show up to OTAs, I mean, I didn't have him making the roster anyways, and this just kind of solidifies that. He had 7 total pressures last year and 0 sacks. Ladarius Hamilton only had, a couple snaps. He had 10 total snaps last year and 1 pressure. So out of those 3, I think Justin Hollins does make the roster in terms of the 53-man roster to start. And that's also dependent on if Rashan Gary starts on IR or the PUP as well. Then as for new players in the edge room, as I said, the Packers signed undrafted free agent Brenton Cox Jr. Most recently with the Florida Gators, was kicked off of Georgia after his first season and then kicked off the Florida football team last year. So there definitely could be some problems there, but in terms of talent, Brenton Cox, would have been a drafted edge player 100%. This guy definitely has the talent if he can keep, his head in the game. And I think this could be a player that the Packers end up, keeping if, like I said, keeps his head in the game. And I do think Brenton Cox is ready to turn that page. And if he does, and turns out to be a good player in the NFL, I think that's a steal for the Green Bay Packers. He had 14.5 total sacks in his 4-year college career. He also had 34.5 tackles for loss. Then they have Keyshawn Banks, who was an undrafted free agent signing this offseason from San Diego State. And then also, like I said, Kenneth Odumego, who is very intriguing in terms of a player. The player pathway program through Nigeria definitely has a lot of athleticism. So I like the group of guys the Packers have in the edge room. I don't really think at this point they need to go out and sign a veteran. I think they're kind of okay with who they have right now. And like I said, it depends on Rashan Gary. It really depends when he does return, how many players they're going to keep at that edge position going into week 1. If Rashan Gary starts on the PUP or the IR and doesn't count towards the 53-man roster, I could easily see the Packers going into the season with 5 guys, and that would include one of Brenton Cox, John Garvin, Ladarius Hamilton, Keyshawn Banks, or Kenneth Odumego. One of those guys would likely make the roster. So it's going to be very interesting to watch this position group, this entire offseason and watch those players fight for that 5th or 6th edge spot there. Because as of this point, I think the locks are very obvious in Preston Smith, Kingsley Enagbare, and Lucas Van Ness. I do think Justin Hollins is definitely going to make the roster, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a roster lock. But those other 3, including Rashan Gary, definitely are. But that about does it for this video. I wanted to give you guys a quick update on Rashan Gary, and it's looking very good. His road to recovery is looking ahead of schedule, which is very good news. I want to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. What edge players do you think are going to make this team? If it's 5 or 6, let me know down in the comments below who those 5 or 6 are going to be. But that about does it for this video. I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching, and as always, go Pack.